And welcome into another edition of the Brian on Baseball podcast. Here we go now on this Friday, March the 6th. The year is 2020. I'm Brian Goudsert as we come to you from Middletown, New Jersey, where the temperature is in the low 40s and it is raining. So not a lovely day outside, but we are inching closer and closer to opening day now in the great game of baseball. Less than 3 weeks to go now until things open on March the 26th. All 30 teams will be in action, and that is always a very special day for baseball fans. We look forward to that very much. Until then, though, we have to get through the rest of spring training, and it's a funny thing about spring training. It's like once it starts and you get that first sign of baseball and the first time that you see your favorite team on the field, it brings that sense of excitement that baseball is back. This is great. We're watching our favorite sport again. And then after you watch a couple games, it doesn't take long for me, and probably not for most people, where you just want to get spring training out of the way. And that's kind of the point I'm at now, where we've seen a few games, we've gotten some games under our belts, and now it's like under 3 weeks to go. We just want the games to count for real. Unfortunately, we still have some time to go. It'll be here before we know it, and we'll have to get through the rest of spring training and hope our favorite teams, whoever they may be, enter the season as healthy as possible, which is a trying task for a lot of teams, it seems, especially the Yankees, who've been hit very hard by the injury bug in the early part of their spring training. We'll have more on that in a little bit, plus more of the latest news and signings, a couple notable extensions to get to, one that will be the top story. We'll break down a full preview of the National League East division as we culminate the National League portion of our division-by-division previews, this day in baseball history, and more. But we begin, before we get to some things going on with the locals, we'll start with the big extension, the big news, and there was a press conference, if you watched it just earlier today on MLB Network, and that was after the Brewers announced an extension for the superstar outfielder Christian Yelich. It will take him through the 2028 season. He already had 2 years to go before he would have hit free agency, so they tacked on 7 additional years, and the total amount reaches $215 million, as first reported by Ken Rosenthal in The Athletic and made official by the press conference today. Now, frankly, you didn't know if the Brewers were going to be able to get this done. This is a team that operates as a smaller market team, and they shed a lot of payroll this offseason. They let a couple of their prominent players from recent years go in free agency, being Yasmani Grandal, Mike Moustakas, plenty of others as well, Travis Shaw. They made a lot of changes with the roster, and remember early on in the offseason, there was even the idea of possibly trading Josh Hader, their exceptionally talented left-handed reliever, and all of that was coming out because you didn't know if the Brewers were going to be able to shell out big contracts when it comes time for their guys to get paid. And there even had been, I would call it, minor speculation about them eventually having to trade Yelich, as hard as that would have been for them because of the financial situation the ball club is in. That may have been their best course of action. Well, instead they committed to him in a big way, and this is a win all the way around, a win for baseball, a win for Yelich, and a win for the Milwaukee Brewers. Why? Because Yelich has become such an exceptional player in only 2 years' time with Milwaukee, winning the MVP his first year there. He was arguably better his next season in 2019. Of course, his season was short-circuited at the end with that injury after taking a baseball to the kneecap, and that cost him the final, whatever it may have been, 3 or 4 weeks, about a month of the season. Brewers still rallied around that to make the playoffs, made the wild card game, and remember that wild game in Washington against the Nationals where they had the lead, they had the aforementioned Josh Hader on the mound, Juan Soto gets the big base hit late in the game, the Nationals rally to win, and of course never look back as they go on to a World Series title. But the numbers Yelich has put up in just 2 years' time in Milwaukee have been nothing short of staggering, and I'm not sure anybody could have seen this coming. I think you could have thought Yelich would be a really good player, all-star caliber, year in, year out, a really good player, but I'm not sure we could have seen the second coming of Mike Trout, which is essentially what he has been in Milwaukee. The talent was always there. He was a first-round draft pick coming out of high school in California. He had some very good years in Miami, albeit on losing teams with the Marlins, but always showed an ability to hit and be one of the game's better hitters. Well, he's taken it to a new level since being traded to Milwaukee because the power has come in a big way. And now not only is he a great hitter where he, can hit 325, 330, win batting titles, but he also can hit 35 to 40 home runs. And when you combine those two things together, what you have is a very special player, and one that the Brewers now have realized is an extremely important part of their organization that they commit to now for a very long time to come. So I was glad to see the Brewers pony up and make this kind of investment in such a good player, and a guy who's not only great on the baseball field, but also has a reputation for being an exceptional leader in the clubhouse, does great work with the community. There's just no negatives when it comes to Christian Yelich, and he's the kind of guy you want to build your franchise around, and that's what the Brewers have done here. They figure to be very competitive going forward, despite their financial restrictions. They're in a very competitive division, but you have a player of Yelich's caliber, and you have a very smart front office, and Craig Counsell does a great job managing the team. They're going to be in the mix. I'm not sure exactly how good they're going to be. They have a lot of new faces on the team this year, but you can't count the Brewers out in the NL Central in this year and expect Yelich to put up more MVP caliber numbers for this year and the years to come, because he has just become that good of a player. So Yelich locked up long-term. All in total, it is a 9-year extension worth $215 million. And now over to another outfielder of significance, and that comes locally in one Aaron Judge. And I talked in the open and in shows past about how injuries have hit the Yankees really hard very early on here in spring training. Well, Judge, unfortunately, was not able to dodge that, and he is going to be on the shelf now for a long stretch of time, unknown exactly, but Brian Cashman says opening day is in doubt. He's dealing with pectoral soreness, so it's unknown exactly when he's going to be able to return to the field. And remember that the Yankees will already be without the services of Giancarlo Stanton and Aaron Hicks, so their outfield is down to a lot of the backup kind of players. Of course, Brett Gardner was signed back on another one-year deal. They're without several key pitchers, Severino, Paxton, Herman, so they're without a lot of key players. The good news for the Yankees, though, when they open the season, it's going to be against the Baltimore Orioles, and, they could play you and I out there, and I think they might be able to beat the Orioles. That's just how bad they are. Still, though, you want to see the Yankees find a way to get healthier and not have a repeat of what doomed them in 2019, even though it actually didn't doom them that much. I mean, they still won 103 games, but it was just injury after injury. It seemed like nobody could avoid the injured list. I think the only key player who managed to stay healthy the whole year was Gleyber Torres. So it was a real issue for them last year, and it's picking right back up where it left off early on now. But what these injuries give you is opportunities for other players to step up. And how much did we see that last year when guys who came with very little baseball experience at the major league level played a significant role for the Yankees, whether it was Mike Tauchman or Gio Urshela or Mike Ford or there were so many guys. And so one that I look to now with all these injuries, especially to the outfield for this year, is it's an opportunity for Clint Frazier, who's, to me, is a very interesting player because we've seen the kind of talent that he has, especially on the offensive side, where he looks like he could be a really good major league hitter for a long period of time. The issues, though, are you put him out in the outfield and he's a complete butcher in right field. How many times did we see it? The one game that comes to mind for me was a Sunday nighter against the Red Sox at Yankee Stadium where he was playing right field. He must have had about 5 miscues in the field, where the ball just going through his legs, taking the wrong angle on a fly ball. It was an utter disaster. And so you wonder if that can improve at all. But what you know is that he is a big league stick. And I think that with these these guys out, with Judge and Stanton out, he'll have an opportunity to play an everyday role. Maybe you DH him some. I think there's still some figuring out where exactly is Miguel Andujar going to play. They've tried him out supposedly in the outfield. Maybe some DH for him, even some first base. Third base seems like not much of a option at this point, considering his defensive miscues, and Gio Urshela, the much more sure-handed player, will get the majority of the reps at third base. But Frazier is going to get an opportunity, probably his best, to showcase what he can do and see how he can contribute to this team, that even once they become whole and they get the injured parts back into the mix, that he could still potentially play a prominent role. And he has that kind of talent. We've seen it. He's a good hitter. It's just a matter of, can he improve his defense and be a viable asset for this Yankee team. But that's what kind of happens. Opportunity knocks when you have these kind of situations, as the Yankees do with so many injuries. And so Clint Frazier now gets a chance to show what he can really do over a long stretch of time. And I think that could prove to be very beneficial for the Yankees. And the freak-out factor of this fan base is a little bit high right now. Yes, because of all the injuries they're dealing with, but also seemingly because of what they saw in a spring training game yesterday when Garrett Cole surrendered 6 runs in a couple innings of work. He was serving up home runs to Travis Demeritte, of all people, in his outing against the Detroit Tigers. And so you're seeing some warning signs go off. I wouldn't make a big deal about it. It's spring training. Guys are tinkering at this point in the season. You know Garrett Cole is going to be fine once the bright lights are turned on and once opening day hits and he's in Baltimore going up against that rather anemic lineup. I would not at all be the slightest bit concerned about what Garrett Cole does in spring training against the Tigers, giving up homers to guys you've never heard of. It really doesn't matter. So I think the freak-out factor should go down. But nonetheless, that's what you get with fans, especially in New York. Freaking out, it's one of their favorite things. It's almost like some fans like to be critical more than positive, because being negative gives you something to talk about. When everything's going well, there's not really that much to say. You say the guy's playing well, and then the story kind of ends there. When it's negative, you can really bury him, and there's a lot of material that you have at your disposal, and that's what drives the sports talk radio. That's why you hear on WFAN all the callers, about 90% of them seem to be negative, and that's just how it is in sports. But hey, that's what makes fun conversation. But as far as Garrett Cole goes, I'm not making too much out of a lousy spring training outing. He'll be fine once the regular season is ready to go. He's one of the 2 best pitchers in baseball. Both of them reside in New York, with DeGrom the other, and it's going to be fun to watch both of them go at it all season long. And now we move on to the latest news and signings from around the game, and obviously number one on the extension front was Christian Yelich, but just yesterday another contract extension handed out, and that was the White Sox to Yoan Moncada, a 5-year deal worth $70 million for a player that they have now committed to as one of the cornerstones of this team. And the White Sox are very interesting. It's been a very busy offseason for them, adding free agents. They've upgraded their pitching staff. They signed Yasmani Grandal behind the plate, Dallas Keuchel in the rotation. They locked up one of their own, Luis Robert, who's yet to make his major league debut. Now they get Moncada on a big extension. They've upgraded every area of their team, and it's a division that's up there for the taking, as we've talked about. We'll have a lot more than more extensive breakdown next week when we take a look at the American League Central, but the White Sox, I don't know exactly how good they're going to be. I think they're going to make a leap forward this year. I'm not quite sure it's going to lead to a playoff appearance in 2020, but they've made a lot of interesting moves, and the biggest thing they have going for them is they now have a young core to build around. You look at Tim Anderson and Eloy Jimenez and Moncada and Luis Robert with some of the veteran pieces, Jose Abreu. They also signed Edwin Encarnacion. So there's a lot of pieces in place for a team to be good over the long haul, and it'll be interesting to see just how much of a leap they take. It's been a losing team for a lot of years in a row. Do they make the big jump where they're a 90-win team? Are they an underachieving team where they're still a couple years away and they win 78 games? Very interesting to see what the White Sox do this upcoming season, but Moncada locked up over a long stretch of time. Not very good news for the Red Sox and their ace left-hander Chris Sale. There's been some talk about possibly Tommy John surgery. We don't know yet if that is exactly in the cards, but what we know he's dealing with is a flexor strain. He's been shut down from throwing. He's going to open up the season on the injured list, and just when he will be able to make a return to the field is unknown at this point. But as I talked about last week, for the Red Sox to have any chance at doing anything this year, they're going to have Sale healthy at the front of that rotation. Not having him is an enormous minus. And these are tumultuous times for the Red Sox, a team that's in transition right now, having traded their best player, still awaiting word on what the commissioner rules for their own sign-stealing situation during the 2018 season. We don't have word about that. They do have a new manager in Ron Renicky, so there's a lot at work for the Red Sox right now, but not having Chris Sale, that is going to be a big problem. Now, they did make one signing for their pitching staff as they added Colin McHugh, who has been kind of a non-factor recently. He had that one big year with Houston where he won 19 games. Remember, he started his career with the Mets, bounced around to a couple of different teams, and then found a home eventually in Houston, where he was a contributor when the Astros were going well for a couple of years there, but in the most recent years had not been playing a very big role. And now with the injuries the Red Sox have in their pitching staff, and it's kind of a thin starting rotation to begin with, perhaps McHugh has a chance to make an impact. And now for the next segment, we move into our division-by-division preview, where today takes us to the National League East, a division that we all know and love so well, home, of course, to the New York Mets. So I'll do what I do for this segment, which is take you through from the bottom to the top and give you kind of a power rankings as the season approaches as to how these teams stack up. Now, when you look at the National League East, conventional wisdom says you have 4 teams that all figure to be very competitive, and the one that clearly is at the bottom, which is the way that a lot of divisions seem to look right now. When we did the Central, it was kind of that way with 4 teams, and the Pirates clearly the 5th team, and the East very much that way as well. So we'll start with the bottom, and that's where we'll find the beloved Miami Marlins. Now, the Marlins clearly are at the bottom of the pecking order in this division, but I'll say this about this team. They can be a pain in the neck, and I've seen them so many times, we all have, give the Mets fits. I mean, you think about years ago when the Mets were trying to get in the playoffs and the Marlins wrecked their season, which we'll never forget, in 07 and 08. But even recently, when they've been going through this full rebuilding process and they've basically worked from the bottom up, they've given the Mets a very difficult time. You think about this sweep they had early in the season last year. I believe it was in May when things were pretty much at rock bottom for the Mets at that point. There was a lot of talk that Mickey Callaway would lose his job shortly after. That wound up not being the case. Later in the season, the Mets were able to handle them pretty well. But the bottom line is this team plays awfully hard. And it's easy to look at them and say they're not very talented and they've lost 100 games the last couple of years, and all that may be true, but when you watch them, they have a spunkiness about them. They play with an energy. They don't just lay down. Like some of these teams you see, the Orioles are just not worth watching with their pitching serving up home run after home run after home run. I mean, it's embarrassing, quite frankly. The Marlins are on a different level than that, even when they were at their worst. And I would expect this season for them to be considerably better than they've been the last couple of years. Why? Well, they've made some additions to their major league roster, and they got Jonathan Villar and Jesus Aguilar, and those are major league caliber players, which when you're a rebuilding team, you don't necessarily have those kind of guys that fill out the roster. But you add in with this team that they have a pitching staff that is very young and very capable, and even though they've struggled a lot in recent years, their pitching has been a bright spot. The Sandy Alcantaras and Caleb Smiths and Jordan Yamamoto is one of the guys who came over for Yelich from Milwaukee. They've done a serviceable job. The issue for the Marlins is that they just haven't scored runs. They've been pretty much bottom of the barrel offensively in the National League, but I would expect them to be better this year. I think they're going to take a considerable leap forward. Now, obviously, they're not going to be anything close to a 500 team, but I would say low 70s in wins for the Marlins, and I think that's a big improvement for them. I was happy to see Don Mattingly stick around as manager, because when you have a team that plays hard and the circumstances are difficult, you know the team isn't going to be very good. He's gotten the most out of them, where I would say the preseason projections for them would always have been lower than what the Marlins were able to accomplish, and I think Mattingly was an important reason for that, and so they decided to keep him on as manager, and like I said, they're heading in the right direction. They're building up the farm system. I think they're going to be pretty good before too terribly long. And you know Derek Jeter is hell-bent on making this a sustainable organization. And so I think it may take some time, but as you see more of their young players emerge at the major league level, this is a team that, when they're good, they're going to be really good, and I think for a long period of time, and I think Derek Jeter knows what he's doing. Look, the criticism was there, and rightfully so at the time when he comes in new and deals off all their best players, Yelich and Stanton, and Ozuna and Real Muto. They had a pretty good core there offensively, but Jeter recognized they could not have a sustainable organization locked up in those big financial commitments, especially to Stanton, and so the best course of action was to move on from those guys, build the organization from the ground up. That's what they're doing, and I think they're going to make a jump this year, and before too long, this team is going to be competitive, and they're going to be good, and it's going to last. Good times ahead, I believe, in Miami. As for 2020, though, a fifth-place finish in the National League East. On to the fourth-place team, and this may be a little bit surprising, but I'm going to go with the defending champion Washington Nationals in this spot, and one reason is I do believe in the World Series hangover. It seems to hit more teams than not, and I think a perfect example of it is the Boston Red Sox from 2018 to 19. You look at how they were a well-oiled machine the year that they won the World Series, and then things just didn't go quite the same the next year, and there were different reasons for it. But one thing is there just is that feeling that once you've won, the edge is off a little bit. And I think that is something that is real, and I think that's something that the Nationals are going to go through this year. Now, the strength of their team clearly is in the starting pitching, where they committed to Strasburg as a free agent for big money to go with Scherzer and Corbin. And it's a team that kind of does things a little bit differently in an era where we're so big on bullpenning and using the bullpen and going with a lot of young players. The Nationals are built on their starting rotation, and they believe on the impact that veteran players have. That's not to say they don't have young players, because they do, and Juan Soto is one of the best in the game. But they do go about it a little bit differently. Now, my thing for the Nationals this year is I just don't think they're going to be all that strong offensively, and losing Anthony Rendon, I don't think you can overstate it enough just how big a loss that is for that lineup, and I'm just not sure that Carter Keyboom, who's been one of the top prospects in their organization, is ready to take over for Rendon, and certainly not equipped to put up Rendon-type numbers. But he'll get his chance to show what he can do, and there is still talent on this team. Trey Turner is one of my favorite players to watch. A lot of talk about him becoming the number 3 hitter in that lineup, but I love him at the top of the order. What he does to set the tone, set the table, the speed that he brings, stealing bases, scoring runs, just an outstanding player that I don't think we've seen the best yet from. But I don't see a lot of protection for Juan Soto. I don't see that other big bat in this lineup. They added a couple other veterans this offseason with Starlin Castro, brought back Asdrubal Cabrera, who played a nice role as a bench player after coming over midseason last year, and they got a lot of veterans around the diamond. They're going to be very competitive. I'm just not sure they're going to be a playoff team this year. I see them more in the 85 win neighborhood as opposed to 95 and being a big force that they were last year, especially after overcoming all of their early season difficulties. And in a division that's just so competitive, I think they're bound to take a step back here, and I place them in 4th place. So it's tough for them as the defending champions to slip like that, but, you know, we'll see how it plays out in 2020. That's where I'll slot in Washington in this division. Now, I go back and forth on the number 3 position here with the Phillies, Mets, Phillies. How do I rank them? I don't want to be bias, of course, because I had been a Met fan for a long period of time, but I'm going to go with my gut and put the Mets at number 3 here. And I think the one thing that may be the separator for me with the Mets and Phillies is who's in the manager's seat. And Met fans all wanted Joe Girardi after the dismissal of Mickey Callaway, and we know what happened with Carlos Beltran and now settling in with Luis Rojas. But I just would trust Joe Girardi, that dependable manager, experienced manager who's won a World Series, and I think will make a significant difference. And with Luis Rojas, look, there's a lot of potential for him to be a great manager, and we've heard a lot of glowing things about him, but until you do it, there is that unknown, there is that question mark. And so I think that'll be one of the reasons why I'll have the Mets a little bit behind. I think there really is a lot of potential with this Met team, and one thing that we've seen is the camaraderie is really there with this team. And if you watch the spring training game earlier this week on ESPN with Pete Alonso and the mic'd up segment, you realize that he is becoming not only the face of the Mets, but quickly becoming one of the faces of baseball after what he did as a rookie. And it's not just what he does on the field. He's just one of those big personalities, one of those guys who's going to be integral in growing the game. And that's why he has the press conference talking about the microphone at first base to hear mic'd up conversations with a base runner and Alonso. And that's all very interesting to see how the game grows, and Alonso is at the vanguard of that. As for projecting his season, you have to expect another big year in the power department. I don't think it's going to be 53 home runs again, but say it's 42. I think you'd sign up for that, and I think that's very attainable. And this guy just puts so much pressure on himself to be great. I mean, he's really a joy to watch. And for the Mets to have this kind of pillar for a franchise, I think is huge. I think it's something that they have been searching for so many years. It's been an organization that's been built so much on their pitching staff, and that's what we've heard year after year about. And now for them to have that position player, to be a franchise player, to be an elite player in the game, to be a face of baseball on and off the field is huge, and I think will make an enormous impact for this franchise going forward. And we know how good this pitching staff is 1 through 5 with DeGrom, Syndergaard, Stroman, the veterans that they brought in, Porcello and Waka. It's a great pitching staff, and whether Steven Matz ends up in the bullpen or the rotation, there's been talk about maybe even going with an opener some games where they pitch Seth Lugo and then they pitch Matz for a bunch of innings. However it plays out, the Mets are going to be very good in the starting rotation. They're deep there. It's been the hallmark of their team. It's been the reason for their success when they have had it. But now they have a lineup to go with it, and they have a core group that's been homegrown, which is something that we haven't seen. And it's not just Alonso, it's Michael Conforto getting better, and Jeff McNeil, what he's been able to do. Brandon Nimmo, if he could ever stay healthy. Ahmed Rosario, who I talked about last week as a key to this season, him taking the next step. So there's so much potential for big things, but there is always that risk of doom when you look at the Mets, and the bullpen a big reason. What can Edwin Diaz do to bounce back after such a disastrous season? I think the bullpen will be better. There's no way that it could be worse. It was one of the worst in the game last year. Now it has Dellin Betances. You hope he'll be healthy. You hope he'll be ready to go opening day, as he's kind of been ramping things up this spring. But my overall thought about the Mets is I think the floor is pretty high. In other words, the worst that could happen. I think at worst this team wins 83 games. I don't see a way that they're a losing team this season. And then on the upside is that they could win, say, low 90s. I think that's also very attainable. So there is kind of a wide range, but at the minimum you expect this team to be competitive. And if the pieces fall into place, and that's been the history of this team, they've had mostly downs, but when the ups have been there, they've been extreme ups. They've been World Series titles in 69 and 86 and other appearances in the World Series, and it kind of comes out of the blue. It's when everything clicks, pieces fall into place. You think about 2015, they didn't win it all, but they got Cespedes, and how things clicked after that, the second half of that season, after the All-Star break, made a run all the way to the World Series. You could see something like that happening again, but luck has to be on their side. Will it be? That's the big question, but you have to like a lot about what you see from this team, the camaraderie that they have, the character that they have, and the talent. And it's all, when you add it up all together, the potential is there for the New York Mets. I would be very optimistic. I just think it's a very competitive division. There's a lot of good teams, and so I still have to place them in third place. But could that be a wild card spot? Who knows? All in all, it'll be interesting to watch them in 2020. And then number 2, I'm going to go to the Phillies, and I talked about the advantage that they have in the dugout. I look at this team, and I think they are very top-heavy. In other words, they've got big stars, and then outside of the big stars, they've got a lot of question marks. But for one, Bryce Harper, to me, is going to have a monster season. I'm going to have a segment in the weeks to come before we get started on opening day with bold predictions, and I'll tell you right now that Harper involves one of my bold predictions, so I'll save that for later. But what I'll say for this part now, expect very big things from Bryce Harper. And Rhys Hoskins had a very bad second half. I have to expect he's going to be better. JT Realmuto is one of the best behind the plate. The starting rotation, that's where there's questions, and they hope that Zach Wheeler is going to be the 1A, number 2 starter to the clear ace of that rotation in Aaron Nola. I think there's still questions just how good Wheeler is, and certainly he got a big contract, and so he has a lot to prove, but the industry feeling about him is that the best is yet to come, that with the velocity, with the age on his side, the fact that he hasn't thrown a whole lot of innings in his career, that he could really break out in a big way, and the Phillies are certainly hoping for that. Andrew McCutchen last year was on his way to having a very good season, and the Phillies were playing their best baseball when he was healthy and hitting atop their order. Once he went down, it changed the complexion of their team. They were not the same the rest of the year, so he's a big key to stay healthy and be a contributor atop that lineup as he advances in age, getting into his mid-30s. The bullpen with the Phillies has been an area of struggle. David Robertson was not healthy most of last year. That's a key to seeing what you can get out of him. Hector Neris as the closer. There's been a lot of ups and downs with him in the 9th inning. I see the Phillies overall, and I say they can go either way. I like a lot about their team. There are a lot of questions about this team, but I think the thing to me that makes me feel better about them is having Joe Girardi managing. That steady hand, that guy who can handle any situation, can handle the pressure that comes with managing in a hostile environment like Philadelphia, and that to me gives them a slight advantage over the Mets that I would expect them to break through this year with Harper having maybe his best season yet and some of the other things falling into place. To me, it all adds up to a big year and a potential playoff appearance for Philadelphia. And then number 1 will be the Atlanta Braves, and this is a team that just has such a great mix of young studs and veteran players, and you add in the starting rotation that they have, all the young guns, some of which have already gotten to the majors, others that are on their way. It's an organization that's been well built, and look, Ronald Acuna is already one of the best in the game with room to get only better. Freddie Freeman, I feel like, is underrated somehow. I don't think people quite realize just how good he is, and it's just a young core that has so much promise with Ozzie Albies, who could only get better. Same for Dansby Swanson, his double play partner. I like the addition of Marcell Ozuna on a 1-year deal. I think he'll have a lot to prove and put up big numbers before he enters free agency again. Nick Markakis is steady as it gets there in the outfield. The key for me with the Braves is Austin Riley, and I say that because they lost Josh Donaldson. There's question as to who's going to fill the third base void, and if Riley can do that and produce at the level he did when he first came up to the show last year, where he looked like he was going to be a big part of this lineup and showed his power potential and showed why he was one of the top prospects in their system, then that will be a big boost to their lineup because Donaldson is a big bat to lose, and Riley had such a big variation from when he first came up to when he really tailed off and was a non-factor once the team made the postseason. I look at him as a key player for them, but I don't see a lot of warts on this Brave team, and I'm curious as to why PECOTA projects them as low as they do in the low 80s. I mean, this is a team that has won in the upper 90s. They've won the division the last couple of years. I see no reason why they wouldn't do it again with all the talent on this roster. They've committed to the regime, the GM Alex Anthopoulos, the manager Brian Snitker, and I think the Braves are primed for only bigger things to come as more of their prospects emerge in the majors and Ronald Acuna becomes even better, potentially the second best player in the game to Mike Trout. There's just a lot to like about this Brave team, and I think are going to be a thorn in the side of the rest of the teams in this division. So to me, the clear-cut number one team in the East, so to rank them from 5 through 1, I go with the Marlins, the Nationals, Mets, Phillies, and Braves in that order. All in all, though, a fascinating division and will be one of the most fun to watch in 2020. And with that, we move into this day in baseball history, and it was on this day, March the 6th, back in 1987, when Expos free agent Andre Dawson, disgusted that he was being offered only $1 million by Montreal, offered to sign a blank check contract with Chicago. The Cubs wound up signing Dawson to a one-year contract worth $500,000. And we close the program as we always do with the ninth inning. And for today's segment, we'll tell you that MLB.com has this new game, so to speak. It's kind of interesting. It caught my attention. I'm sure it may have caught yours if you checked it out. They call it the Vault, where you can predict who will lead this decade in 9 categories. The categories range from awards like Most Valuable Players and All-Stars and Cy Youngs, all of that, to which team will have the most wins, which team will win the most World Series, all those kind of things. There's 9 different choices, and if you win this contest, you get an illustrious $1 million. So why not try it? It sounds fun, and I'll just give one pick here to close out the show. I'll take team wins, and I'll go out a limb here and take a stab at the Tampa Bay Rays, who have been such an innovative organization in what they've done with their pitching staff, the success that they've had with their financial situation, basically at the bottom of the league, a stadium situation that is not great. I mean, there's so much that's working against the Rays, and yet what they do is find a way. And for that team to win 96 games last year and challenge the Astros in the playoffs, take them to a 5th game in the division series, it says a lot about where they're at, and I think will only get better. Their farm system is one of the best, and Wander Franco is viewed as the universal number one prospect in the game. So you have to figure the best is yet to come for this team. And so I'll take a stab at, for the 2020s, the Tampa Bay Rays to win more games than any other team. It's a prediction, so why not make it a little bit bold? And that will close this edition of the Brian on Baseball podcast. Thank you for joining us today. We had a lot to cover. Next week, we will take our division-by-division preview to the American League Central. We'll be joined by John Source to help us out with that. He's our resident Kansas City Royal fan, so we'll get his thoughts on his team and the rest in that division and more next week, whatever else is going on as we inch closer to opening day. So thanks again for joining us today. Feel free to follow me on Twitter at Brian Gadsworth, and our thanks as always go to Dylan DePrato. I'm Brian Gadsworth. Thanks again. We'll see you next week. Have a good one, everyone. So long.